But I think that there's a lot that we can do virtually. I think everyone's probably a pro at these virtual settings by now. So we'll do a chunk of this this week, and then we'll go into the rest of it next week as well. Just a few thoughts to respect our space. There are no silly questions. Please mute yourself when not talking, especially with noise in the background, and respect people's time. So keep your comments brief. We are going to do a lot of group discussion today. And so if for some reason you feel like you're going to go on to a 5-minute speech, please press pause and find the 30-second summary of that, and be able to share that out with your friends and neighbors so everyone can have a chance to participate. Many of you know me, Delegate Sam Rasoul, Virginia House of Delegates. I grew up here in Southwest Virginia, and I work in organizational development. So this is leadership training and development is in part what I do for a living. There are my Twitter handles, Twitter and Instagram handles right there. And also wanted to introduce our team. You will see them in different picture windows. Lily and Eleanor, who are wonderful members of our team who really helped to make not only this presentation today possible, but did a lot for our intro video yesterday. So we talk about chaos theory, and the idea for this came to me that in the sense that so many folks are wondering, what do we do? There's so many moving parts. But when we begin to study it, there's a difference between things that are random and then the chaos that we experience. And one subset of this that you've heard about probably before is that what's called the butterfly effect. And you kind of see a visual of the butterfly effect in front of you. Many of you have heard the metaphor, the butterfly flapping its wings in China causes something here in the United States. What it's really saying is that just one minor change, one minor spark can create, in this definition, we see underlying patterns, interconnectedness, constant feedback loops, and self-organization. And clearly that spark that happened in November 2016 created that self-organization, gave birth to the Women's Summit and to Network Nova. So today what I wanted to do first and foremost is a little bit of interactivity. So I'd love for you, if you don't have your chat open, to open your chat and type into your chat. We want to add in some pieces here, and I'm going to escape out of this view so you can see what we are writing. And let us know what are some of your fears that have come out of this chaos, because they are real. And we would like for us to share a little bit of that. So if you can, in the chat.
Fascism.
Okay, we've got, there are a lot of fears here. Fascism, Trump will win again, voter suppression, isolation. Thank you, Francesca, for sharing that as well. Oligarchy, civil war, racism, the climate catastrophe. Again, that Trump will win again, civil war. We've got threats of misinformation. COVID spirals out of control. We certainly do not have that. How to sustain the change, Lisa puts in there. That is really important. That political pendulum swings for sure, and we've got to be ready for that. The loss of democracy. Takeover by other authoritarian regimes, world peace, the need for world peace. So lots of great raw truth here that I think is important. It's really important for us to be able to, I think, confront our fears first and foremost, and so that way we can utilize that as energy in trying to own the chaos. So what I want to do with this, because these are some wonderful thoughts here, is to go into our first group discussion. So in a moment, I'm going to put you into some breakout groups here. We've got, it says 123 participants. So we've got a great crowd for a beautiful day. And don't worry, we're going to try to get you out a little early today. Great crowd for us to be able to discuss this first question in our groups. And the premise is that chaos, in leadership, we learn that chaos always presents opportunity. There's always some opportunity that comes up. And when we looked at the definition of chaos theory, we saw that there are patterns, interconnectedness, and self-organization. So the question for us to ponder today is what opportunities come from the current chaos? And so I'm going to put you into these breakout rooms. And in these breakout rooms, I'd like for you to discuss that for about 15 minutes. And then you'll be coming back and then we'll try to summarize that and bring it all together. So the breakout rooms will happen here in just a moment. And for all of you who have not been in breakout rooms, it'll push you there. It might take up to 30 seconds for you to go into your breakout room. So don't worry if it takes a little bit of time. And then I will give you a countdown to automatically shut the room. So it'll automatically bring you back. If you've got any questions, you can ask for help. But we look forward to hearing what some of your thoughts are.
Sam,
and so, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I have a question. So the participants know when they get in that room, will there be a leader assigned that will be the leader of that discussion, or are they supposed to just start talking?
There are 125 leaders on this call today.
Good, okay. Just
so all we are, and no, there's no leader. What we are asking is that you just keep your comments brief.
Gotcha.
And give everyone that would like the opportunity to talk an opportunity to do so.
Owning that chaos, I love it.
Owning that chaos, okay? So I'm gonna open the rooms here momentarily.
Sam, I actually have a question, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
So there are people still entering the meeting, so will they just automatically get assigned to a room, I guess?
Great question. I will, it'll ask me and I will assign them to different rooms.
Okay, good. So I will stop letting people in and let you let people in.
No, you can continue to let them in. They'll just they'll be in the main room.
Okay.
They'll be in the main room at that point.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So what opportunities do you see coming from the current chaos? Hello, friends who have just joined us. We are in some breakout rooms. If you can hear me, you're about to be assigned to a breakout room for a discussion. Eleanor?
Hello. I only had access to one breakout room.
I think that is always the case. I forgot. I think that that's what it was before.
Okay, just
I
wanted to
don't-
double check.
Yeah, I don't know if I can give you access. I don't think that I could give you access to multiple rooms.
Okay, that's fine. So it does look like the comment you had made with the group question is available in that chat box in the breakout room that I was in.
Tease. In the chat box, okay.
Just wanted to let you know.
All
So
right.
I'm gonna pop back over to group 10 and just kind of monitor that.
All right.
Okay.
Great. Hello, everyone. There are a few people who have just joined that I see are in. The 130 or so participants are currently in a group that is about to close, and then they will come back in just a couple of minutes. So we will dive back in at that point.
Hey, we're back.
And they're coming back.
Sam, it was awesome to be in that room. And there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion out there, and it was powerful. Just want to let you know.
Well, I was bouncing around between rooms, and the conversations were a little bit different. And clearly, we could spend 90 minutes just on that question. But more important, or just as important as the answer to the question, is asking that question on a consistent basis. And that's one thing that we like to do in our office. But the question of what opportunities are in this current chaos. And every great leader knows that within any calamity, any chaos that's happening, there are always opportunities for us to capitalize on some of that change. So I think that we're giving it a couple more minutes.
Coming back, I see that. What I love is the opportunity to really connect with people, and that's part of this programming you're bringing to us, and it just makes you feel stronger, just connecting. So as we wait for people to come in, it's awesome.
Well, I see several former candidates, Juanita Joe and Ella and some others who I know have been able to do that on the campaign trail in the past. And that's what this is, a people business for sure, the business of politics.
We're back.
All right. All right. I see everyone's back. There's Lisa Sales, a bunch of other folks. Looks like I think everyone is back. That is great. I hope you had a lot of great discussion. We would love to hear a tiny bit. We're going to do that by chat again, if you don't mind. And we're going to put up some of those things. So if you want to, by chat, put in what opportunities come from the current chaos. So what's an opportunity that you have thought about, that you've experienced, that you're seeing others capitalize on in this current chaos? An opportunity to reset, awareness, create innovative vision, community, the power of postcards. I think you all know a few things about postcards up there. A sense of purpose, increased empathy for others, connectedness, Black lives and all lives matter. We've got all kinds of safety for all, Black Lives Matter, again, awareness. This has certainly raised our awareness. Lisa talks about young people being engaged. Denise is talking about safe protesting for older people, trying to figure out in this crazy time, how can we make sure everyone's voice is heard? We've got change at local level, increased justice, the need for more canvassing, more diverse groups coming together, which we maybe haven't seen since '68, making substantial changes in economic structures. That's, I think, really important. You certainly can't have racial and social justice without economic justice, and sometimes that gets lost. Way for introverts to be able to be involved, improve government at many levels. So there are lots of great feedback, and it's important to think about the opportunity. Clearly, we saw the opportunity after the November 2016 election, and now with everything being compounded, there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the current chaos. But the question is going to be, how do we own that opportunity that comes out of the chaos? So thank you to all of this wonderful feedback on opportunities, and hopefully you're thinking through that now. Let me kick this into present mode. And so what we outlined in the video that you saw yesterday is that there are 3 keys. There are probably many more, but there are 3 keys that we've identified that we're going to be talking about during our 2-week session. And today we're going to really focus on mapping chaos through fight, ignore, engage. So this first one is trying to figure out this right here. There are a lot of voices, a lot of different folks. And how many of you know how to use the function where you can give a reaction? So give a thumbs up in the reaction if you get confused or question, who am I supposed to fight? Who am I supposed to ignore? And who and when am I supposed to engage? I think that this is something that we've gotten a lot better at over the past 3 years, because at first we were all wanting to fight so many different voices, and then we realized, wait a minute, maybe that we'll need to be smart about that. And then the 17, 18, 19 elections came around, and here we are with 2020. And so we'll describe this a little bit, and then think through who we should be fighting, ignoring, and engaging, and then how we should be doing that, because that is critical in our activism. One thing that I have learned in my short time in politics is it's never enough to be right. You have to be right and bring people along, or else for me, I feel like I'm being selfish if I just want to be on my self-righteous soapbox, being right. I've got to figure out how to bring people along. That's how we impact social change. That's how we actually help to move along this continuum of justice. So first, fighting. Who do we fight? There are just a few people that we actually fight, and a few instances where we should be fighting. And those are largely these bullies who pose a clear and present threat at the current moment. And sometimes we find it difficult to figure out who that voice really is and how to distinguish it. We've got a great picture. We have these neo-Nazi white supremacists who marched on Charlottesville. That's become an iconic message. The reason why we have to fight it at these very few but specific moments is because these bullies will keep coming back. So our lesson is, how do we fight? We fight in a very calculated way. The civil rights era was dominated by leaders who were extremely calculated. And what happened in Selma, what happened in the boycotts, Rosa Parks wasn't just a random woman who sat on a bus. This was calculated, and they were very smart about how they approached it. So be calculated, stand up, and we do so because we don't want them to come back. Ignoring, who do we ignore? Those who are simply just seeking attention. We've got a tweet here from Jerry Falwell from Liberty University. You've got voices like Rush Limbaugh and Laura Ingraham, but it also is that random Facebook dude who's just spouting out at the mouth and wanting to say all kinds of nasty things. Whoever that person may be, while it may make us feel good to engage, we're probably wasting some of our energy. And we certainly don't want to waste our resources and energy. Question is, what do? We don't respond because we know we're not going to change their minds. We'll simply empower them. And we know with fight, ignore, and engage, there's some gray space, but we're going to lay down some ground rules so that way we can figure out who to bucket and how. Now, next, I want to play for you a great video here that is pretty interesting. That's only a minute long. And what I liked about this specific video is it's not, it's like a cool way of ignoring and fighting at the same time. So let's see if this comes through well for you. Can you all hear me? All right, let's see what's going on with the
Try to launch it again, maybe.
Let me try it this way.
Did you share your screen with sound?
All right, let me stop share for just a moment.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hi again. Just
Hello.
click on that optimization and sound, and then I always forget to do that too.
All right. Let me see. All right, let me do this. Well, I don't know if it's going to let us today. Let me try one more time, and then we might have to.
What to do if you see someone in a public space getting raped?
All right, can you hear some of that? Let's see. Thank you for your.
I'm having fun looking through all the faces here. Welcome, everybody, again.
Okay. Now let me see if this will.
What to do if you see someone in a public space getting racially abused or harassed. Rather than engage with the person who is doing the abuse or saying the abuse, is to engage with the person who is receiving it. So say you're sitting at a bus stop and somebody starts yelling some rubbish at the hijabi black woman sitting next to you. You can turn to her and say, hey sis, I love your jacket, or your headscarf looks amazing, whatever it is, like how you doing. Don't engage with the attacker. That'll just make them pissed off. You engaging with the victim of abuse directly humanizes them, makes them feel supported, but also uses your privilege to protect them from further escalation.
All right, team, did we hear all that?
Yeah, that sounded good.
Okay, great. So the I really liked the example that she gave here about trying to engage the person who's being abused as opposed to the person doing the abusing. So she, I think, did a great job and gave us some good advice there. Now, on to engage. And I know I think somebody's saying we've got a few questions in the chat. We will try to get into a little bit of that if we can, for sure. So thank you for your patience. And my team is taking notes on some of those questions. So thank you so much for those as well. And then who to engage: open-minded friends, neighbors, and forgotten voices. And so the question here is how to do that. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the concept of being able to appreciate your privilege. I think all of us have some privilege. And it's important to be able to identify and acknowledge what that privilege is. In the current setting, many of you have maybe heard of the book called White Fragility, when we're talking about race and racism. And I thought it was really interesting, and it educated me with regards to actually what racism actually is, and how we engage in certain dialogue and really understanding our privilege. So with regards to race, for example, there's a difference between racism, racial prejudice, and discrimination. So racial prejudice, anyone can have racial prejudice. I can with anyone, and it's something that I think it's a predisposition of how I think that this person or group of individuals are, or how they think. So this is my prejudice against this race. Discrimination is when I act on that racial prejudice. And so when I'm willfully doing so. Now, racism, though, is a systemic issue. So, for example, I, as an ethnic and racial minority myself, cannot actually be racist in America when whites are in control, have the majority. The only entity, the only people that can be racist are those who actually have the majority power, is what Robin DiAngelo argues. I can have racial prejudice against white people, but racism only comes from those who have the majority power. And I thought that was a great distinction, because the majority power has the ability to be able to manipulate the system, the racist system, against those in the minority. Now, that's just one way of appreciating the privilege of race. I have privilege as a man. I have privilege in my elected title. I have privilege in lots of other ways. But when you appreciate your privilege going into any engagement, which is a big part of this book, White Fragility, that then puts things in perspective, allows us to, what we're going to talk about is build trust. And you've heard me talk about different ways of building trust and how the neuroscience has played out and what it shows us about the different parts of the brain that we're talking to and building that trust. But one specific tactic that we're going to talk about today are the ABCs of building trust: acknowledge, bridge, and convince. And I'm going to, we're going to try one more video if the technology will let us. Let's see.
What was your initial response when you saw that Colin Kaepernick sat for the national anthem?
I'll be completely honest, my initial response was anger, you know? I was angry and disappointed because I grew up a Niner fan and I was pulling for this guy. And now he just pissed on my flag. But then I just stopped making all these judgments and tried to listen to what he's talking about.
Specifically, is police brutality.
And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I want to try to understand where he's coming from, at least somewhat, because I haven't walked around in his shoes, but he hasn't walked around in my boots. You know what I mean? So I just wrote a letter and he got a hold of it.
He contacted you?
Yeah, he contacted me. He said he was inspired by it and he was wanting to sit down with me, you know, just have a discussion. First thing he said when we met was, hey, I just want you to know I appreciate your service more than anything.
I expressed to him, maybe there's a different way to demonstrate where you're showing more respect for those that lay down their lives for what that flag and anthem stands for. I suggested, you know, kneeling, because people kneel to pray. You know, we'll kneel in front of a fallen brother's grave,
you know, to show respect. And he said, I think that would be really powerful.
So this is news to many, this concept of this veteran, Nate Boyer, who wrote this open letter to Colin Kaepernick, who many of you have heard of, who made it famous to be kneeling at the national anthem. What was happening at first was Colin Kaepernick was sitting on the bench, and that was his form of protesting police brutality. And then you heard the story of Nate Boyer sending this letter in and actually convincing. And what was interesting is the way he went about convincing. So in the ABCs of conversational intelligence, we're talking about how to acknowledge, bridge, and convince. And this is an important tactic and when we're trying to have conversations with one another. So what he did, and I'm loosely pulled a few quotes from the open letter that Boyer sent to Kaepernick, is first acknowledge, you know, unfortunately, I know that racism still exists in our country. So he's acknowledging that pain. And if you all haven't noticed, the past two videos are from TikTok. So that's how us older millennials are having to get in with the crowd of Generation Z and try to really understand some of the newest technology. So that's where some of my education is coming from. It's from TikTok. So first, Nate wisely acknowledged the pain of racism exists in our country. And then you're looking for a bridge. And what we mean by bridge is anytime someone says, hey, I know what you're saying, but anytime you use the word but, you've negated all of their feelings, what they've said. So we never use the bridge, but we find some other bridges. And people I've used, here's the thing. His bridge was much more long, but I think he did a pretty good job. You know, what you do takes a lot of courage, in quotes. I'd be lying if I said I knew what it was like to walk around in your shoes. And he goes on to talk about some of the pain that he's gone through. So he's bridging into that conversation. And then at the end of this open letter, he went in for his convince, which was partnered with their subsequent conversations that you heard a little bit more about in the video. Convince, embracing the motto of the Army Special Forces. And then I didn't take Latin, but Dio Presso Liber or Liber, Latin for to free the oppressed. So and that's when he said, look, we all want to free the oppressed. Would you consider kneeling instead of sitting? And so the next time somebody gives you flack about Colin Kaepernick and kneeling during the national anthem, you can tell them actually that came at the request of a veteran, and that's where Colin Kaepernick got it from. So I thought that that is pretty cool and a wonderful example, I think, of ABCs of conversational intelligence. So we're going to break out into a group discussion. And in this group discussion, I'm gonna stop the share for a moment. In this group discussion, we're going to think about instances where we either fought or we ignored, but we should have engaged. So either we let someone flip our switch on social media or otherwise, or maybe there are instances, I know I've come across instances where I have personally ignored a situation where maybe I needed to engage. And so when we go back into our breakout rooms, this is what we would like for you to discuss. We're going to do that for about 15 minutes. Now, I know that there are a number of questions, and what I'm going to do is make sure that we bring back some of those questions and try to address some of the questions that you all have been putting in the chat right after the group discussion. So I'll be reviewing that here shortly and looking forward to hearing some of the feedback as I go through some of the groups, and you'll see some of our staff doing that as well. So here momentarily, we will push you into the rooms. Again, it'll be 15 minutes. Thank you. go.
Welcome back, guys. We're just going to wait as people filter back in from their breakout groups. I hope y'all had some good conversations. When I popped into a couple, it seemed like there were some good chats happening.
Everybody's coming back, Sam.
They are. They are. We have a great crowd today. Well, as they're coming back, we'll just say Happy Father's Day again to everyone. And thank you again to the Women's Summit for putting this on. Thank you to everyone for joining us here in the middle of, hopefully it's a beautiful day where you're at. Enjoying it here for sure.
We're back.
All right, looks like we are all back. Hopefully you had some great conversation. I popped in and out of a few rooms and saw some great conversation as well. So, you know, what we want to do is, the whole point of this is to really identify when to fight, when to ignore, and when to engage. And it's not that we have the same answer all the time in every instance of when to do that. But the fact is understanding that three groups do exist, coming up with your own construct of how to approach it. So what ends up happening is you come up with your own rules and you're like, oh, this is an instance where this person is really ticking me off on social media, but I have a rule here that I know I'm not going to waste 30 minutes of my time trying to convince this person of this when I know I'm not going to make any change. The reason why this is important is there's the concept, and this is in economics, called opportunity cost. And an opportunity cost is, what's the cost that I'm going to put into this? My time, energy, resources, whatever that looks like, into trying to convince so-and-so, even if I feel like there may be a marginal benefit to it. Is it really worth the time and energy that I should be putting into maybe engaging a member of the community who's not maybe politically apathetic or is not very aware of what is going on? So today isn't necessarily to tell you what to do in every circumstance, but to be able to kind of think through that there are tests here that we can think through, that we can apply as we move forward. I know that there were a number of great questions that were in the chat. We were trying to get into some of them. That was roughly the answer to the question of, you know, how do we fight those in our community, especially our neighbors? Remember, opportunity cost. We want to think through, just because we know we've got the racist neighbor and you're thinking about that person all the time, or the family member, where is your energy better spent? And do you really need to jump into this? Another great point was about, what about comments between or issues, racial prejudice, we would call it, and even discrimination between minority groups. The specific one was Asian Americans belittling African Americans and the African American experience, which was a great answer. The reality is you have to understand what your privilege is. So just like in the first video, where the woman was outside of the altercation, If you are an African American and wanting to confront an Asian American for belittling African Americans, it's probably going to mean not as much as the Asian American. So it is up to whites to be able to stand up and say, hey, you white people, we need to do this differently, as well as the Black voice that is pushing for that kind of justice. So I'll give you another great example, which is a very, very hot topic. In other words, touchy subject, and we're not trying to solve this today, but the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I'm of Palestinian descent, and in Virginia, we stay on domestic policy. But I know as a Muslim American that I will never be able to see any resemblance of peace there without my Jewish brothers and sisters standing up, and me doing everything I can to support those Jewish brothers and sisters, my Israeli brothers and sisters who are pushing for peace and justice. And so those are the most powerful voices. So you have to run that test and think through what that might be in your specific case. So lots of great questions for sure. And I know that the questions continue to come in, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. What we did want to do is a fun little activity before I get to some of the other questions that my staff is doing their best to try to summarize and get to me in the chat. And thank you so much for your patience. You all have been great. But we're going to if the technology will let us, we're going to have a little poll here. And we're going to go through a few examples, and let's just see how we're thinking today. So we've got this example of this tweet that's here. Y'all can see Mr. Brent says NASCAR wants to ban the Confederate flag. I don't think so, says Brent. So I have a poll question for you about that. And hopefully you can see that pretty well. I will put it in present mode for a moment. Let's see, is that better? And I'm going to launch this poll. And the question's going to be, what would you do in this scenario? Fight, ignore, engage. So I'm going to send it on out. So hopefully y'all are seeing the poll. We're seeing lots of responses. I'm up to 80 responses, 90 responses out of 122. We'll give it a few more seconds. We're over 100 responses. And then I'm going to share this out to you. We've got several scenarios we're going to quickly go through, and you can just see how folks are thinking right now. So we've got most responses in, and we'll end the poll, and I'm going to show you the results. So I'm hoping that you can see these results. And it says that 82% of you, 89 of you are saying that we should ignore this person. So I think that that's a pretty good advice. This is a random, looks like a random tweet from this guy. But again, everyone comes from different circumstances, and there's different context. And all we're doing is just showing you a snippet here, but it's just to get the juices flowing to kind of think through it. All right, now I'm going to get rid of the poll and give you this scenario that I hope everyone can read. The local chapter of the KKK is to hold a White Lives Matter rally in the city square on Juneteenth. A friend plans to hold a counter protest and asks you to come. So with that in mind, I'm going to relaunch the poll. What would you do in this scenario? Hopefully you're seeing the poll. All right, yep, it's pouring in. We got about 50 responses right now. What to do in this situation? Should we fight, ignore, engage? I'm going to stop share for just a moment. All right. So we're thinking, what should we do? We're fight, ignore, engage. And all right. So it looks like we have a critical number. I'm going to share the results with you. All right. So most of you said engage, which is 55%, 31% said fight. Now the context is some people may think of this as engage, some people may think of it as fight. It just depends. Usually the fighting is that there's an imminent threat of that is present. And so the testing that you think of in your mind may be a little bit different for one person or another, but this gives you a good example of what this team is thinking today. All right, so now we're going to go to the third example. A member of your church approaches you after Sunday services and remarks that she's disturbed by the systemic police brutality and militarization going on in the country. Then she comments that, though, the looting and rioting isn't the answer. So the question is what would we do in this scenario? Fight, ignore, or engage? And the poll is launched. And we've got over 80 responses, over 100. We'll give it a few more seconds. Catherine, is this making you think a little bit? Just head bob? Yes, all right, good. I'm gonna end the poll because this looks like that there are a lot of folks who are thinking the same way. I think the key to this one is that this person has already shown a degree of empathy, that they're disturbed by the systemic police brutality, and but they're just not sure if the looting and rioting is the answer. And so this might be a great time to make the distinction between rioters and protesters, and that we certainly don't want some of the rioting to overshadow the real message. But clearly there's an in here with a member of your church, so you have a tie-in to potentially engage. So pretty good responses here. Great job. All right, we just got a few more of these. A man in a Trump shirt and a hat is outside your local grocery store handing out literature and states that President Obama's birth certificate was fabricated. What should you do? And the poll is open. We're over 100 responses right now. Give it a couple more seconds. All right, we'll end the poll. I'll show you the results. 82% of you thought to ignore this person who is sitting out there handing out literature about President Obama's birth certificate. That is probably a good idea to ignore this person. But again, everything has to be in context. And the next example is you and your sweet elderly, let me make sure I'm on the right. Ah, here it is. I'm sorry, I skipped one. Your cousin, with whom you're very close, shares an article on Facebook that states that some of the iconic recent images of protesters being beaten by police are actually Photoshopped. I know everybody's seen something like this. After some quick Googling, you determine the article is incorrect and comes from a known right-wing news source. What should we do in this situation? So I'm going to relaunch this poll. And there is over 80 responses so far. All right, we've got over 100 responses. People know what to do with their cousin. We're talking about knocking this person upside the head. We're going to engage this person. All right, I ended the poll with 110 votes. I'm going to share the results. 105 of you, 95% of you thought to engage. And I think that there are a couple reasons why you could potentially engage here and how you can engage. Number one, your cousin, so you've got a relationship with them. And number two, the question is about how you actually engage. So one thing I love to do is to simply find a relatively credible source that some people might like, maybe a Snoops or something like that, or that will say that these pictures have been photoshopped, or that the article itself is incorrect in this case. And so, and just sharing it with little conversation allows for, because remember, you're not only having a conversation with your cousin, you're having a conversation with everyone else that's watching. And for me, a lot of the conversations that I have on social media myself, I'm having those conversations with individuals knowing that most of the conversation is for the context of there are others that are watching. And I want them to be able to benefit from that. So if I can objectively present information, and other people can go to this link and it'll show, well, so I've had people quickly, many times, then just delete that initial post that they had because they didn't want to be viewed as someone who's spreading false information, especially maybe it's from your cousin. So I'll stop the share here and we'll go to this next example. That's maybe a little bit tougher. You and your sweet elderly widow neighbor are casually chatting outside in the street when a van of landscapers drives by. The workers are predominantly Hispanic. She comments that she feels unsafe when other neighbors employ foreigners, and she wishes the workers would go back to where they came from. What would we do in this case with this specific neighbor? I've launched the poll for our sweet elderly widow racist neighbor. We've got about 100 responses in. We'll give it just a couple more seconds. And then we'll end the poll here. Okay, we've ended the poll and here are the results. 93 of you, 87% said to engage. Some of you said to ignore. I think that there's a great case. And again, it's also going to be in how you respond. If you probably respond to her instantly saying, well, that's pretty racist of you. That may or may not be the best thing, depending on the context. And, or you can just subtly say, oh, well, actually my parents came from this country. So I guess we all immigrated here or something along those lines. There may be interesting ways to engage for sure, and sometimes to ignore. But I'm really proud of this group today. Stair, Catherine, Robin, y'all should be really proud that nobody wanted to beat up their elderly widow neighbor. Nobody said to fight her. So I really appreciate that. That means we've got a good group. Last example, and then we'll get into some takeaways, is we got this another tweet. I will not be silenced. It's a MAGA talking about how silly they think all these masks are and yada, yada, yada. What do you think you should do in this situation when you see this tweet? Sometimes Facebook post that just says random craziness. And the poll is launched. About Over 50 have responded thus far. Doing great. All right. We've got almost 100 in. One more second here. Get them on in. All right, we're going to end the poll. And we see that 82% of you chose to ignore this post. A few of you, 15%, wanted to engage, and some of you wanted to fight. And so, you know, again, the opportunity cost, what makes the most sense for you? Where can you be placing your energy? But more importantly than what your answers were to any of these 7 scenarios, let me share that out with you. 82% of you chose to ignore. More importantly than what you chose to do in any of these 7 scenarios is the question of who and how am I going to fight? Who and how am I going to ignore? And who and how am I going to engage? And it's critical to draw that battle plan as we are bringing it all the way back to owning chaos. What do we do in this chaos if we're just randomly reacting? Then unfortunately it's owning us. But when we have developed a battle plan for what we're going to do in these situations, that's important. So let me get rid of this. And I will tell you, if you remember that first video where she had talked about using her privilege to protect the young woman that was sitting next to her that maybe was being assaulted or verbally assaulted. That's really important, is to think through how you can use your privilege to raise someone else up, which sometimes, especially in this case, for me, for example, not being Black, how can I help my Black friends in this difficult moment, which I know many of you are thinking about, to raise them up. So I know that a number of questions have come in, and we will try to skim through a couple of those very briefly. But what we want to do is think through what are some of our takeaways are for today. And so I will, before I get to doing a little bit of question and answer, what I want to hear from you, I'm going to take this off of this mode. And this might be dangerous because I know that there are a lot of takeaways, but and we have such great participation today, and I'm very thankful for people taking their Sunday afternoon to be with us. But what we've discussed over the past 90 minutes as a team today, and what you've learned from one another, we'd love for you to put into the chat. I already see rules for your approach. Put into the chat, what are some takeaways that you remember that you're going to be pulling out of today's talk. We would love for everyone to be able to think about some of the other takeaways others have. So make sure we listen, value your time and energy, think before engaging, be woke. I love that. Make sure that they take time to think about a situation. Whatever you do, think through it. I'm reminded of the importance of planning responses. That is great. We call that storming, and we might be touching on storming in our next session for sure. ABCs, acknowledge, bridge, convince. Have a plan, a framework to fight, ignore, and engage. That is so important. If you think about the champions in the civil rights era and many others throughout time, it was very intentional. One thing I loved learning was about how much time and energy, for example, Martin Luther King put into writing his speeches. Really choose your battle. Making sure you understand how to support someone who's maybe being bullied. Use your white privilege to raise others that need that privilege. Make sure we have intentional responses, because words do matter. I think we mentioned opportunity cost, which is great. And then there are always options for sure, and supporting the victims. So we've got some great takeaways that folks have been able to share with us today. This is a great session that we've been able to have today. Unfortunately, it's feels like for me the time has just flown by in these virtual settings. We have been able to hopefully share a little bit with you in this first step. In our next session next week, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about some of the other pieces that we wanted to take away. Today, we did, however, want to be mindful of your time, being that it is a holiday and hopefully a nice day where you're at. But we are really interested in your questions and your feedback. Your feedback can be emailed. There's an email address right here, delsrasoul@house.virginia.gov, or you can send it through social media. And then we're also going to be saving this chat. And as we save the chat, we're going to be looking at additional questions that we may have missed along the way. But if you also have questions, please email that to us. We're going to make an intentional effort to answer some of those questions in a section in the next session. So that way we're all as responsive as we can be for sure. So we've shared some great information. Now I want to be able to kick it on over to my friend Stair. I'm going to first stop sharing here and kick it on over to my friend Stair, who's going to close us out today. You all have been fantastic.